Okay, so hello and welcome back to ESPAS-ESTICE Inside Out. Today we are going to talk about small and medium-sized enterprises, which are enterprises that have less than 100 employees and a turnover of about 50 million euros per year. They actually play an important part in the European and French economy. So, for example, following a research of the INSEE, the French Institute for Statistics and Economics, in 2018, SMEs employed around 6.3 million employees and accounted for 43% of the added value. However, when it comes to changing the owner, SMEs are often struggling to find successors. And this is what we're going to talk about today, actually, with one of our teachers, Mr. Carl Pitchford, who recently wrote a paper about the succession of SMEs. And this paper won an award for the best paper at the MBAA Chicago, which is a virtual conference where scientists, normally from the US, present their researches. So, my first question, Carl, would be, why did you choose this topic? What did you present in your paper? And how can we solve this problem of succession for the SMEs?
Okay, well, to kick off with, maybe first of all talk about my different research interests. First of all, I should mention that I spent a number of years working in small and medium-sized family-owned companies. Okay, So that's my industrial career, and more particularly also in the furniture industry. So obviously I've picked up from that and gone on to study more particularly everything to do with transfers of small and medium-sized businesses. So that means when the owners are usually coming up for retirement. Okay. The second element for me is research about involving more, let's say, workers, employees in the ownership and the management of their companies. So that's an area that interests me also outside of the furniture industry. And thirdly, as I've been actively involved, and I mentioned that in a couple of other podcasts as well, in the European and international cooperative sector, obviously transferring ownership to a worker cooperative is also part and parcel of all that. So that's a little bit to set the tone. This paper I wrote focused on 3 different countries, which is also quite, let's say, innovative from the sense that normally scientific researchers choose their country of origin or choose a particular country. As you know, I was born in the UK and studied in the UK, so I've obviously still got some strong attachments with that country. I also lived and worked in France for a number of years. And then I thought it was also, therefore, interesting to compare those 2 countries, but also to bring in a country outside of the geographic European location, and that was the US, because the US is really a hotbed of, let's say, transfers to employee ownership. So there's also a lot going on there in terms of financial innovation to help workers obtain more democratic ownership of, for example, the companies where they work.
Okay, thank you. So can you tell us more about this conference and why you think your paper got chosen for the best paper?
First of all, the MBAA conference in Chicago is a very American conference. And it's because of a connection in the United States. I was the only professor to present outside of the United States.
Whoa.
First of all.
That's impressive. Okay.
The second thing is that my paper fits in well to my specialities, as you've probably realized. Obviously, we've got the finance side. We've got the business side, because I'm not just a professor, I'm still practicing. Okay?
Yes.
Which wasn't the case either for the other professors, because they were all full-time professors / researchers.
Yeah.
Okay? And thirdly, I've also got that operational side from an industry linked into a topic which is of interest, because lots of people are asking, well, what do we do with all these companies?
Of course.
Who's going to take them over? And as you can imagine, some countries start to get very nationalistic, and we're all guilty of that. Okay, we don't want certain countries, certain nationalities to take over our small and medium-sized businesses, because we fear that they may close them down, etc., etc. So all of that was a very innovative topic. And the fact also that I took 15 companies from the furniture industry from those three countries that were transferred to employee ownership, and I compared them with 15 other companies that were sold to the competition or to private equity. Okay, so I was able to do some financial analysis on all that, draw some conclusions. I think that's what struck them, that it wasn't just one particular element in the US, that they could see that things were also happening in other countries. And my recommendation was to propose, particularly for Europe, because it already exists in the United States, so my recommendation was to set up a fund which would help employees, if they needed it, to take over the business.
Okay, that's really interesting. So you not only delivered a research about 3 different countries, but you directly found a solution for Europe. So no wonder that you won that award for the best paper. Okay, so now maybe you can explain us a bit further how this principle works. How can workers obtain more democratic ownership in the enterprises they work in?
Okay, so I focused again on the furniture industry, and I took 3 different employee ownership models. So let's start with France first of all. In France, we talk particularly about the cooperative model, and as I've mentioned in a previous podcast, we talk about what we call the SCOP. So if you want to sell your business in France, whether it's in furniture industry or everything, to the employees, then it's via a SCOP. Okay. In the UK, we've got 2 models. So we've got worker cooperatives, and let's not forget that the cooperative model was created in the UK many, many years ago. But we've also got what we call a workers' trust, and that's more of a legal, technical transfer of ownership through shares in the company. And we call that an employee trust. And then finally, in the United States, you've also got worker cooperatives, which are very, very popular. But in the United States, we've also got another option, which is called an ESOP, which is an employee share ownership plan.
So, but now we talked about 3 different models, and now I'd like to know how they differ. Is there one that is more democratic than others?
Okay, well, if we start with France and the SCOP, if we convert or if we sell a small or medium-sized firm to the employees under the form of a SCOP, or cooperative, then that's the most democratic form of ownership that exists in France, the UK, the US, or anywhere else. Because everybody who has shares in the business has a vote. So we make the decisions collectively. Then we move on to the other 2 models. So if I take comparison of employee trust in the UK and an ESOP, employee share ownership plan in the United States, they're more or less on an equivalence. So all the employees who want to can have shares in the business, but they don't necessarily partake in the decision making. So they've got shares that they can cash in when they leave the company or when they retire. And more particularly if we go one step forward in the US, and a little bit in the UK, but it's not, you don't necessarily have that option in the UK, is that it contributes, it enables workers to build up their retirement. Because in both those countries, it's not the same system as in Europe, where you've got a given retirement, etc. Those are all options in both the UK and the US. So it enables employees to build up a nice package for their retirement. And then when they retire, they cash in their shares and they're able to pick up their package. All options are valid in the 3 different countries because 3 different cultures, 3 different approaches to business.
Okay, so that sounds really interesting, but how can the employees finance their ownership? So how can they manage to have enough money, enough funds to take over the business?
In terms of financing the deal, you can imagine it's not very easy for employees to raise funding if a company is worth, 10, 20 million euros, for example. It's not easy to get that if it's a small business. If there are 100 employees, there are many, many banks and financial institutions, in all 3 countries that are also prepared to help in the financing, But we also have many other alternative options today. For example, we can use crowdfunding platforms, depending on the size of the deal. It usually tends to be less than 200,000, 500,000 euros, because you can imagine people are not going to contribute a lot of money. But one of the options we have in all three countries is sometimes to enable what we call seller financing. And what we can do is if we have a serious project, and that's what I work on with clients, with employees, is if they have a real project to take over that business, and the seller of the business could be a baby boomer, so somebody nearing retirement, and the business is in good financial health, okay?
Yes.
And the owner of the business doesn't have a successor. So we can imagine a scenario in France where the owner of the business took over from his parents and so on, goes on from generation to generation. But for example, his kids have gone on to study. They may have chosen different professions, okay? So they're not interested in going back and running their parents' small manufacturing company in Midwestern France or something like that. They've got their careers, okay? So what we can do is that if the owner prefers to sell it to the employees, rather than sell it to a private equity firm, which is a financial institution, or rather sell it to the competition, who may relocate the factory and lose the jobs, then the seller is prepared to finance part of the deal. And sometimes that can be as much as 50%. So in other words, the seller, as an individual, gives a loan to the new entity, to the new business, which is under the form of a SCOP, for example, and the SCOP reimburses the loan over a given period. And sometimes those are really the successful deals. So the owner stays on, okay, as a transition period, a consulting period that enables us for me, for example, to go into a business and to structure with the employees, a transition period with the owner and a payback period and an objective. We can also sell our business to a financial group, which is called private equity. Okay, those exist everywhere in every country. Okay, with obviously also an element of risk, okay, because those people are going to look at finance, they're going to look at costs, okay, and they're going to look at the return that they can make from that business. But they're not there to save jobs, okay, they're there to cut costs, make profit, and in 5 to 8 years' time, they have a strategy to exit, and they want to get their money back. Simple as that. Okay. Which could leave the company in a difficult financial situation, and then when they leave, if they don't manage to sell it on, okay, and that's another part of my activity, is I try to pick up deals from private equity and quickly convert them to employee ownership. So we save the business and we restructure it because it could be in financial difficulty. And the third option that we have is to sell to what I call a strategic buyer. So that could be a competitor. Okay, in the furniture industry, for example, who's interested in picking up, for whatever reason, manufacturing facility in France there. But of course, if the economy goes down, if they don't manage to build a coherent strategy to build the business, then we have also that risk that they will close it down and just move everything to where they came from. That could be Germany, that could be China. So that comes into my responsible, sustainable part again. It's making sure that we keep the jobs in the countries. Okay, so a company is not disappearing with all the know-how and everything. Okay, the jobs stay in the region. We keep that company going, that know-how, and it also at the same time avoids us relocating that business and those jobs to what I call low-cost destinations.
Okay, great. So employee ownership seems like a great solution. Okay, so now on to conclude, I'd like to know how our students could maybe work in this field if they are interested in it. So, for example, could you name some companies or cooperatives, better to say, which are based in France?
There are some quite large cooperatives in France, and I'm talking about large groups. Okay, I run a course on that, particularly in the 5th year. But I can mention just a couple like Edouard Leclerc, the retailer, Système U, some of the larger French cooperatives. Okay, they're all making millions and billions of euros turnover. So they're big organizations.
I see.
So that can be interesting already for students who might want to think about working in that sector in the future and being a part owner of that business.
Yes.
But in the region, for example, there are many more smaller cooperatives which can also provide advantages for students, because it's like being in a startup, but it's under the form of a cooperative. And I think that offers our students some interesting opportunities if they want to combine a more social side to a business career.
Okay, great. So thank you for your time again. This paper seems to be really interesting. I hope our students will have the opportunity to learn about it more in our courses maybe. So yes, thank you, and see you next time. Okay, so what can we take away from this episode? First of all, we can say that employee ownership seems like a great solution to the SME succession problem. As Carl presented in his award-winning paper, employee ownership can enable the companies to stay in the region, as they don't have to be sold to private equities or strategical investors, who could, if they don't manage to resell the business, close it down or relocate it to low-cost destinations. And then, second of all, the models of employee ownership vary between the countries, whereas a SCOP, like in France, is the most democratic version, and others, like Workers' Trust in the UK or ESOP in the US, enable the workers to build up a retirement. And finally, when it comes to financing, we have various possibilities. Often successful strategy is the seller financing, where the owner gives a loan to his workers to make sure they can take over the business. So thank you for listening. Don't hesitate to exchange with us on social media or directly via Teams. We are always happy for your questions and your interest. Thanks again, and see you next time.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.